video. Thank you.
Well, a very good day to all the viewers and listeners across the world. What a wonderful event we have in front of us as part of CPhI Southeast Asia. Certainly a very warm welcome out of Thailand on a very mild 25 degrees in Bangkok. I am Pia Pinar. I'll be moderating this event and also presenting, and I'm the president of the World Packaging Organization. We also have with us Dr. Nazneen Rahman, CEO and co-founder and founder of UMaker. I'll introduce her fully just before she presents. So with no further ado, other than to say to you, during the presentation, please make notes of any questions you'd like to ask, or put them straight onto the chat function, and I'll pick them up there, and we'll take any questions that any of you might have with regards to this very important subject of sustainable pharmaceutical packaging. So with no further ado, if you allow me to call up my slides. Okay. Please don't forget about any questions you want to put up. Right, so looking at sustainable pharmaceutical packaging, and the first image that comes to my mind is this one, which is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which lies between the Californian coast and Hawaii. And this is not sustainable in any manner or means. So we need to do something regarding this. And 120 years ago, Mahatma Gandhi said, there is enough on the planet for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. How true is that 120 years later? But before I get into the pharmaceutical packaging aspect, we need to understand and have a clear image in our minds and your minds, what exactly is sustainable packaging. And it's a bit of a balancing act, and that's why I put that rock up there. It's a bit of a balancing act between looking at what our current needs are now and meeting those, and then balancing that and ensuring that there's no compromising of what the future generations require to meet their needs. And so to do this, one has to look at a number of aspects. They are social.
Yeah. Sorry, we can't see your slides at the moment.
Oh.
They're presenting.
Why is that? Thanks for telling me. Can you see them now?
Yes, that's working now.
Right, sorry about that, everyone. Okay, I did show this slide, the first slide, which is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. I explained what it was, and this is not sustainable. We need to look better at what we're doing in regarding the sustainable factor in packaging. But to do this, we're reminded of what Mahatma Gandhi said 120 years ago. And looking at that aspect, we now look at what is sustainability. And I said it was this balancing of what our current needs are, balancing with what our future generations' requirements will be. But involved in that, we need to look at the social aspects, the economic aspects, and the environmental aspects. So in simple terms, that is planet, profit, and people. And it's a mesh of all three intertwined to deliver a sustainable outcome, because in there is a number of factors: the equitable aspect, the viable aspect, and certainly the variable aspect. And we take those, what I've just said, and we then create what we call the Sustainable Packaging Guidelines. And I won't go through each one because all these will come up in my presentation, right down to looking at design for accessibility, which is as important as looking at the first one, which is design for recovery. So let's have a look. We're not looking just at lightweighting or reduction of material or just recycling. It's more than that. We need to empower consumers so that they are able to lead their lives in a more environmentally positive way. In other words, educating them, equipping them, and empowering our next generation. There's some errors that are made in packaging right as we talk, because a lot of packaging allows up and is allowed to end up in landfill as what they call allowable waste. And no waste should be allowable. And why is this happening? Because there are errors being made during the manufacturing process. And at the same time, we need to understand that the sustainability aspect is made up of a number of layers. What do I mean by all these layers? I don't mean layers as in material. I'm referring to what is the material? How is that material made? How is it transported? All these aspects impact the sustainability of that product. And I say the product, it's not only the packaging. And I'm sure Dr. Rahman will cover this aspect of the product side of things as well. Companies across the world are beginning to make sustainability commitments. However, they're lacking a lot of detail. And that's why we need to put in place specifications. Specifications for every aspect that we do in manufacturing, so that we make it correct the first time. We need to know where we're going. It's like a pilot in the airplane. If he doesn't know where he's going, how will he know how to get there? So we are the same in that when we're in a manufacturing environment. We need to know what we are making, how much of it we are making, and for how many people, and who's consuming it, and how much is being consumed. And therein lies the lack of understanding, because all those factors are not known always. And if we don't understand that, we do not understand sustainability. So companies need to keep all these sustainability commitments in mind, remembering that it's a journey. It's not a one-time commitment, done, finished, move on. No, it's continuous, because we have to continuously review the layers that I was talking to you a moment ago in that supply chain. How are the items produced? How they're disposed of? How much water is used? What is the greenhouse gas emissions? All these must be known. And when one looks at all these materials, and I have here paper and metals and glass and plastic, all of these are materials that we use in the pharmaceutical field, every aspect of it. But we need to ensure that we are using the right material for the right product. So we're not sending stuff straight to landfill because an error was made. So the engineering aspect of each of these materials is paramount. Paramount to deliver a more sustainable solution. Let's just take one snapshot in the supply chain, and let's look at the coal supply chain, because that currently is very hot on everyone's mind regarding COVID-19. So in that circle that you see on the screen there, we need to ensure that there's ownership of temperature control, and there's clear responsibility between the different stages in the process of getting the product from the manufacturing aspect to the patient. Because if we don't, what happens is, you can see there's a temperature fluctuation, but there's a band in which it has to maintain. But that, from time to time, is breached. And as soon as it's breached, the product potentially is damaged. And that's when it's thrown away. And then that adds to a problem of sustainability that I have just been talking about. So this is critical. Temperature control throughout the process must be maintained, must be maintained. In that container, we have to know how to pack it. This is where we need the packaging engineers to be there to explain to those folk that pack these products in the containers exactly how to do it, to get the airflow, to ensure that the temperature is maintained in that shipper container throughout the voyage, throughout the supply chain. And this is not being done across the world. So we need to know what our customer requires. We need to understand our customers and deliver what they want. We, the baby boomers, we have handed over to the Generation X, Generation Y, and Generation Z. And we know that they are ones that want the best tools and the technology at their fingertips before they commence anything. Now, they grew up with this sustainability being thrown around. They understand globalization, and they continue to always innovate. And therefore, if this is what these generations are, then we need to embrace the technology to support that. So, and then that simplifies the complexity that we as baby boomers had. We need to prevent the chaos and use the data that's available and make the correct decisions. And in making those decisions, we then balance this aspect of more packaging versus less pharmaceutical waste. And it is a balancing act. What do I mean by how does this thing work in terms of balancing act? when one looks at this graph, there's what we call the sweet spot. It's the optimum pack design, where we're looking at the environmental impact, overpacking and underpackaging, and then a waste of pharmaceutical versus a waste of packaging material. And this is where we as packaging engineers, packaging technologists, this is where we are involved. And we can help prevent the destruction and the landfill situation of packaging, and ensuring that the product and the pharmaceuticals are maintained right up until delivery to the patient. So we need to stop greenwashing. In other words, misleading claims about packaging. That they really need to be claims that are supported through proper, verifiable testing methods. Like, for example, degradable. What does degradable mean? Degradable is meaningless if there's no qualification to it. In other words, what time period? Most packaging will degrade over time. It just won't be in my time or your time or your grandchildren's time or generations to follow. It may take 500 years. So that degradability aspect is of no value. So we mustn't mislead the public. Biodegradable, it's a similar scenario here. There's no real understanding. There's no single definition of what biodegradable actually means. And again, that can be misleading. When we talk about 100% biodegradable or 100% degradable, the similar scenario. We have to qualify under what conditions does that apply. So just like that, using the word biodegradable or degradable is misleading. Recyclable, for sure. Yeah, we have a definitive series of symbols that tell us what the product is and that it is recyclable. As a mono material, it is recyclable in the collection systems. That's very clear. So we need to continue to strive for this circular economy, an economy where it's a closed loop system. It's a system whereby we're using renewable energy sources, and the systems being implemented are thought through to ensure that nothing is wasted, nothing to landfill. At the same time, we can employ a life cycle analysis. So now we look at all the aspects from A to the end, from A to B to C to Z, or to Z, in relation to all the environmental impacts in that entire product's life cycle. Every aspect, from the chopping down of the trees to the machines that take trees and produce a paper pulp, to producing the end product of the board, and the energy that's used, and the ships and the trucks that used to transport it, etc. We take every aspect into account. Then we can suitably compare a paper bag to a plastic bag and see which one has the better life cycle, less impact on the environment through a life cycle assessment. That's a very accurate way of doing it, because if we don't, we will continue to see this that you're seeing on the screen. We will continue to see waste, like you saw in the very first slide, in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. We have to move away from that. We have to move away from a situation where 40% of all plastic packaging produced is used once and then thrown away. We are putting 8.3 billion kilograms of plastic into the ocean every year, every single year. Now, how heavy is 8.3 billion metric tons? Hard to understand, but it is 18 times the weight of our entire human population. That is staggering, and we can make a difference. Remember, in the very first few slides, I said it's equipping, empowering, and educating that will make the difference. At the moment, we are only recycling 20% of plastics worldwide. Some countries better than others, but on average, about 20%. 80%, you know where they're going. And we in the WPO will continue to work along the likes of UNIDO at the United Nations in reducing packaging waste, in reducing product waste, like pharmaceuticals, and ensuring that we improve packaging education to everyone. Let's have a look at some of the issues that are facing us. The big one is counterfeit products, medicine. 9.4 billion by 2023, and up to 17.5 billion by 2027. The World Health Organization reckons it's about 10% of all medicine is fake. And you look at these images, it's very hard to tell the difference. Packaging continues to receive a lot of negativity in the public eye. But we know there's a need for packaging. We, in the packaging industry, we're part of the solution. We're not the problem. The problem is the consumer disposing of the packaging not in the most suitable way. Because, folk, it's as simple as this image on the screen. There is no planet B. And at the moment, in terms of the natural resources that we are using, we're just short of 2 planet Earths at the moment. And if we continue to do what we're doing on the trajectory, in other words, the red line, by 2050, we'll require nearly 3 planet Earths. There is no planet B. But if we change our way of doing things, and each and every one of us fix that which we can in our own backyard, in our own homes, and ensure that we recycle whatever we can, and that the manufacturers produce recycled material, then we can be at 1 planet Earth by 2050. So there is a solution. Here are some of the solutions. This is a sustainable wool-lined insulated packaging that's being used at the moment in the pharmaceutical sector. It maintains below 5 degrees for 48 hours, and it's used, and they're using wool to be able to do it. We have the first sustainable blister tablet in paper. Fantastic solutions that are now coming out. We have the first polyethylene thermoform blister lidding, a world first in the recyclable field of pharmaceuticals. And you can see there a massive reduction in the carbon footprint. We have the first recyclable PET, fully PET pharmaceutical blister that was launched earlier this year. The high barrier protective solution. And as I told you, right in those 10 guidelines for sustainable packaging, one of them is easy opening or accessible packaging. And we are now seeing more and more improvements being made to packaging to allow easy access by everyone. Asia as the largest sector market in the world. What do I mean by that? The grocery rate is at 6.4%. Why am I talking groceries in a pharmaceutical presentation? Because if the growth rate in the grocery sector is 6.4%, then there's a lot of spending happening there, and potentially that has a direct impact on pharmaceuticals as well. It controls nearly 40% of the entire world market. Just the countries of India, China, and Indonesia. And interesting is that nearly 75% of all new sales will be generated out of this area by 2023. So this is where we need to focus. This is maybe where the pharmaceutical sectors need to focus as well. And we need to continue to educate, equipment empower industry. And there are various formats in industry. This one was in Australia, this one was in Lebanon. Teaching them, equipping them about packaging. This was in Indonesia, to a pharmaceutical company, where we focus on ensuring that we bring the latest to the industry regarding regarding packaging technology. This was in Vietnam, helping those folk to do what every other developed nation can do as well. But not only industry, we need to do the same in secondary schools. We need to educate them about packaging. They are the future generations. We need to give them the knowledge to make the right decisions, and not only in secondary, but also in primary. Because these children absorb information and hold on to it. So we need to focus on primary schools across the world in the sustainable sector of packaging. Thank you very much. Right. Well, thank you for that. And with no further ado, and I'll remind you all to make sure you put the questions into the chat function, you have my my blessing on any questions that you'd like to ask. You are welcome to ask at the end of the next session. It gives me profound pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Nazneen Rahman out of London. And you can see it must be fairly cold in London, quite different to here in Thailand and in Australia. She is the founder as well as the CEO of UMaker. Now, what is UMaker? Some of you might not know. So they are an action lab that builds, tests, and scales up sustainable healthcare solutions. So all of you that are in the healthcare industry, here's your chance. Not only is she involved in UMaker, she's also a non-executive director of AstraZeneca, where she chairs the Science Committee and the Sustainability Committee. And that's where our paths have been crossing more recently. Dr. Rahman was also Professor of Human Genetics at the Institute of Cancer Research in London. And she heads up the cancer genetics at the Royal Marsden National Health Services Foundation Trust, and has been doing that all up until 2019. She also has garnered numerous awards, including a CPE in 2016 at the Queen's Birthday Honours for services to the medical science. Dr. Rahman, I look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm delighted to be here. I wish I was with you in person because it is very cold here in London. As Pierre was saying, I've had a background really of being a change maker. I like to take new knowledge. I've been a scientist all my life and a doctor, but taking that new knowledge and turning it into real impact to real people. And I think packaging is a really key way in which that happens. I agree totally with Pierre that packaging is much, much more than just the coverings around our products. They're a really dynamic and important part of that product. And really this decade, I've really committed to trying to help to make our medicines more sustainable and more accessible. And I think those two can go together. And also key to that is making it good for people, good for planet, but also good for business. It has to work for business. We have to make medicines and keep medicines affordable. So it's a bit of a hard ask to be able to do all of those things. But we've had tremendous commitment and passion towards making that work. And one of the ways we've done this is through the Sustainable Medicines Partnership, which is what I'm going to tell you about today. And we'd love more participation from anyone who's interested. So I'm going to see if I can share my slides now.
All good. We can see you.
Great. So what is the Sustainable Medicines Partnership? So what we're trying to do is build real practical evidence-based solutions to help reduce the waste of medicines and medicines packaging. So, and as I say, good for people, planet, and business. So what's the problem? As Pierre was saying, we throw away too many medicines. Each year, about 4.5 trillion medicines are made, but billions of these effective medicines are thrown away unused. As we were hearing, billions of medicines are lost due to packaging or delivery failures. And this is a huge cost to us, both to our planet, that huge environmental cost, and 20% of the carbon emissions from healthcare comes from pharmaceuticals. It's also a huge financial cost, billions wasted every year. And at the heart of that, there's also a further tragedy that we have 2 billion people on the planet who do not have access to basic medicines. So we are throwing away medicines with one hand, and we have people who desperately need them on the other side. And we simply cannot continue to do this. And this is the time to change. And the reason this is the time to change is because of the awareness that's coming from all sectors, which is both putting a pressure upon anybody in the sector to deliver change, but also is giving us an opportunity to drive forward that change because the incentives are becoming aligned. And part of that awareness comes from the interrelationship that we are now beginning to understand between climate change and health and healthcare. So increasingly, we're becoming aware how bad climate change is for our health in a whole different ways, from pollution, from fires, but also we can see how healthcare is bad for our climate. And if the healthcare sector was a country, its emissions would be equivalent to the 5th largest country on the planet. So we really have a duty and increasingly an obligation to try to make healthcare be more sustainable and better for our planet. And everyone is demanding change from us: governments, healthcare, investors, patients, employees. And certainly on our side of the planet here in the UK, the NHS have made a very strong commitment to delivering a net zero national health service, again with strong commitments on packaging and also obligations on suppliers to the NHS of having to prove that they're showing their commitments by the end of this decade. The US is pretty close behind. And certainly in China, and I'm sure in many of your countries also, you're beginning to see obligations. And of course, in the pharma industry, many players are global players. They are providing medicines across the globe. So we're going to have change. That change is not easy because it's a systems change, and so it's going to require collective stewardship, commitment, and action. And we will need to work together. We'll need to work together because we do have to align this people, planet, and profit. And it's going to take all of us, individual citizens, right the way to corporations and countries. And we need to move from these aspirations and targets to really thinking about how. And that's really why I'm in this decade. I'm not really an activist, I'm an actionist. I like to do practical solutions. And they have to be in our sector, they have to be tested, they have to be evidence-based. We are dealing with the safety of people, and so we need to have that data, and it needs to be tested. So that was the background to our solution here, which was to have a multi-stakeholder global partnership to really execute priority actions that will reduce medicines waste and make medicines more sustainable. And this is a sort of 10-year journey. The concept was, as I say, at the beginning of this decade. This year, we've been pulling together the partnership, and we're delighted that the WPO is part of this partnership. It is a global partnership, but I would say that a representation from Asia is not as high as we would like. So I'm very delighted to be here, both because we want it to be global, but also because of my own heritage. My family originally came from Bangladesh. And then next year, we're really moving into our practical 4-year program of actions, which I'll now tell you about briefly. So this is a 4-year program to deliver evidence-based scalable solutions through integrated projects. We're pulling together the cross-sector of partners that are really needed for action. And our aim is to deliver practical tested solutions by the end of 2025 and the toolkits to enable that scale thereafter. And the way that we have articulated this is around what we call the pillars of sustainable medicine. So in order to be accessible to everybody that's engaged in this, for people to feel that agency and empowered, it's really important to have a narrative frame that people can understand. And so we've come up with these 6 things that we're focusing on that people can understand and feels relevant for people. So the first is to have a measurable environmental impact for our medicines and our medicines packaging. The second is to have this end-to-end quality assurance. The third is to have better shelf life. That really helps with reducing waste. 4 is to leverage and use digital information wherever we can, particularly in the information leaflets. The 5th is to make sure we have every dose used, we don't waste them. And the 6th is around sustainable packaging. The packaging is absolutely relevant to every one of these pillars. So we've been designing out these projects this year, and I'll briefly just tell you a little bit about each of those. So for this first pillar about having transparent environmental impact, pharma and medicines currently is way behind the curve here. The carbon footprint is currently, we have to base that on the expenditure, how much one is spending on medicines, not on the actual carbon emissions. And this is a big problem for governments or health services or anybody who's measuring it. And it's particularly a problem because it's such a big component of that footprint. So what we're doing here is building integrated practical metrics. And there are really 3 components to that. There's the pharmaceutical itself, the active pharmaceutical ingredient. Second, there's the packaging. And 3, there's the transport. And there are some actually quite simple things around the packaging that make a big difference. So the simple size of the packaging, if you can reduce the size of that package, it makes a very big impact on the carbon footprint, in part because it has such a big impact on the transport. The second one is this issue around avoidable quality excursions, or also around counterfeiting. We have to have end-to-end quality assurance so that we can stop throwing away medicines that we're concerned might have had a quality excursion during its journey. And as you can see here, a very large volume of medicines at huge environmental and financial cost are due to these quality excursions. Now, there are solutions. There are digital solutions, there are smart solutions. Medicines are now have serial codes on them, so there are opportunities to use here. We have to make this work both practically and financially because the margins are small. So we still need further innovations, but we are, through the S&P, testing integrated delivery solutions and also developing these standardized frameworks that, again, there are some simple things, how to pack medicines properly within lorries if you're trying to maintain your temperature. The third is this issue around having a better shelf life. So currently the expiry date on medicines is not what we typically think of about expiry dates up to after which time medicines are not usable. Really, this reflects the date of approval. It was the date when approval went in up to which a manufacturer would guarantee that quality. But it's well known, there's been lots of data to show that the majority of medicines are effective for much longer on average. Now, currently, post-expiry medicines have to be destroyed, so that's billions a year. There have been what's known as these shelf life extension programs, saves a lot of money, saves a lot of medicines. One of the things we want to do is template out those processes so that countries like the ones you represent can use them in a safe way for medicines that you need, or at times when we have compromise of our deliveries, as we are currently having in the pandemic. The third is this issue about leveraging digital information. And one of the key things we want to do is about the patient information leaflet. And currently, paper information leaflets have to be included within most medicines. Now, this is an area where Asia is really being innovative. Places like Singapore and Japan are already moving over to digital. And this not only has an impact on reducing the waste of paper, but it also has opportunities for giving more patient-centered information, different languages, read out, videos, if we can turn to digital. And also if we can take out the paper, we could reduce the size of the packaging, which has improved impacts on the environmental footprint. And about 5 to 10% of medicines end up having to be thrown away because of some issue around the paper information. So really moving so that digital information is the default. And of course, if we need paper or anything else, we have to support that. But that doesn't mean we need a paper information leaflet inside every one of our packets. Fifth is this issue of making sure we don't throw away usable medicines. Now, billions of surplus medicines are destroyed annually. Now, part of that is a sort of recognizable part of the system that we need to maintain supply of our medicines to our patients. And so we have natural excess in that system. We have overages. However, those overages are more than we need. Using inventory science, you can use better forecasting these days. But also one of the things that we really want to do is, instead of writing off those excess medicines, is that we can potentially put them into access programs, so get them to people that need them. And because this is such a big industry, even a small amount, there's about 3% of manufacturers' medicines end up being written off for this reason, but that's over 100 billion doses a year. So one of the things that we've been doing again is templating where this is working well, so that more people can, and more countries and systems can access them. And then finally, and really critically, is this issue around packaging. As Pierre was saying, there are actually many innovations and things that are already being adopted. What we like to do in the SMP is really focus on the hard stuff. And so we're really leaning into the plastics that are used in medicines. So something like blister packs, we are seeing innovations of PVC-free, plastic-free medicines, but that's probably currently going to be suitable for maybe a third of medicines. But for those medicines where we need that extra barrier property, and of course we have to maintain first and foremost the safety of our medicines, the integrity of our medicines. So we are going to need plastics, we are going to need PVC in those for many years to come, not least because changes of this take time and are very expensive. So what we're really into is actually having processes where we can use our current plastics and make those recycled. And there are real innovations, particularly in what's known as chemical recycling, where you turn complex plastics, including blisters, back into their original monomers, their raw materials, so that they can be used again in a circular way. And this is not just better for the planet, this is also gives opportunities for valorization. These recycled raw materials are becoming increasingly attractive. We have high quality plastics in our materials. They can be used to upgrade the microplastics that are coming out of the oceans. So there are real opportunities here if we can have a sort of innovative mindset. So these are the sorts of things that we are doing. We would love to hear from anybody who'd be interested in these aims. We have to act together, but if we act together, we can deliver substantial impact and value. For your own organizations, these types of things can reduce costs and increase efficiencies. It will help you in your own aspirations towards environmental and sustainability and social goals. It will allow you to share and learn about innovation, and also to show these credentials that are going to be so important to all of our stakeholders going forward. And really, it is a very, very big problem, but that means that there are opportunities for very, very big impacts. And we do genuinely have the opportunity to stop billions of effective medicines being wasted, to stop millions of tons of CO2 emissions, to stop billions of wasted healthcare expense, and also on the other side, to increase equitable access to medicines and also to knowledge. So if anyone's interested, please do contact us, and I will stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Nazanin. I always enjoy your presentations because I always have lots of questions when I watch your presentation. And while we wait for any questions to come in, we've just to let you know, we've got 1,300 people online watching at the moment across Europe, including from the UK, obviously, USA, Canada, Brazil, across Asia, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, India, and your home country of Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, South Africa, Egypt, Morocco, and Australia, New Zealand. So fantastic, a really cross-section. I'm sure that many of you out there are dying to ask us questions. You've got someone from the pure pharmaceutical sector, from a medical aspect, and then you've got someone here also from the packaging side. So while we wait for those, Nazanin, there are a couple of things I want to talk to you about. I really like that aspect where you said, I'm an actionist and not an activist. I love that because is my understanding correct when you say that you're an actionist? You want to see things happen. Where did this come from? That you are this way, your thinking or your thought process is there in that space?
Yes, well, first to say, I think the world needs activists. So it's not and we wouldn't be here without decades of activism showing us that climate change is an important thing. I think that in terms of the actionist, I suppose everybody likes to do their bit in a different way. My bit of that is really thinking about what are these, how can you turn this new knowledge and actually make practical solutions, and that journey of turning knowledge into practicalities, it is a hard one, and one has to go through a whole cycle of change there. So I like being able to do that, and I like making things that are simple, elegant, and just work really, really well. So it's a sort of design element, there's a sort of creativity element pulled together, undercut by science, data, and an opportunity to just make the world a little bit better than you found it. I suppose that's where it comes from.
Can I pick up that last sentence you said there, because that really pricked my ears there. It resonates that you were saying you want to leave the planet in a better place than what you found it. Is that my understanding what you're saying?
Yes, I mean, I think for our generation, as we I suppose we grew up just not knowing really what we were doing to the planet, and just thinking, oh well, the planet's got endless resources, just wasn't really in our thinking. And I certainly have found it very powerful hearing what our children's generation are saying. Hang on, we shouldn't be doing this. We should be caring for our planet. And I'm delighted that they're doing it. But I sort of feel that we've sort of given them a hard task, and we should probably clean up a little bit of the mess that we made. So I think we didn't do it we did it unknowingly in many ways, but we do know now. So I think we need to change, and I think we can change. Some of these are sort of habits. We've become over consumerist. We all have too many things, and so that sort of simple, purposeful, sort of less wasteful, making the best use of things quite sits well with me anyway. But I think yes, that is sort of obligation on our generation, I think.
Talking about generations, and you reflected on children a moment ago. Again, that certainly fits well within my thinking. We need to look at the future generations, because they're going to They need to take over where we've left off. And I don't mean that in a negative way, I mean it in a positive way, because certainly some skeptics might say, but hang on, you on your way at the end of your career, and you guys, you messed this planet up for us. But I am of the other thinking. I think in our generation, we have realized there is an issue, and we are tackling that issue, and we're doing something about it, because in many ways, one of them being that we need to educate our children in packaging, in the sustainability world, not only in packaging. I mean, you reflected on the product side of things in the pharmaceutical sector, which I want to come back to in a moment. Do you think that in general, children, and when I say children, I'm saying, let's say under the age of 15, really want to improve the status quo when it comes to the sustainability world?
I think that I think children in general, they sort of consume whatever is sort of going around them in a sort of open way, really. But I think that as we increasingly see celebrities or the people that they are inspired by, or they're watching, whatever, really caring about it, and it being a matter of concern, I think that will naturally happen, and certainly, and we can see that's happening really in all parts of the world. So I think as an issue that's relevant to children and young adults, I think it is on the radar, increasingly going to be part of what they talk about, which was very different, I think, from really the generations above. And so, yes, I do think so. And I don't think we really need to do anything about that. I think they're sort of doing it amongst themselves. It's really the rest of us who didn't grow up with that needs to have a lot of change, I think.
Yeah, I certainly, I think I agree 100% on you there. One of the things that I often do in the education world that I'm involved in quite often is reminding the students, mean that still at school or university students, how mindful are they of packaging? If I ask the question now to the audience, how many of you actually thought about the packaging that you touched since you woke up this morning? And while we're talking about the morning, Nazanin, thank you very much for getting up so early in London. I know it's like the crack of dawn there. And certainly, I don't know, the sun hadn't even hadn't risen by the time you got up. So thank you very much. But are the children mindful of that packaging? And do they think that, hang on, we can do this packaging thing better? Because obviously they're seeing the packaging in the stores, and then they're seeing the packaging that is lying around the streets and the waterways and the rivers and the sea and the beaches. There's this, I don't know, dichotomy. How do you see it?
I mean, I really think that the dichotomy I see is much more in the industry, to be honest. I think that, and reflecting, I think, on one of the questions that we had there, is how are we actually practically going to make that change? And there are still challenges, I think, for people, even if they're wanting to do these innovations. How can we roll that out within our industry in a safe, effective, and cost-effective way, just to do these things? How are we going to do that thing? So I think people are feeling a bit of that dichotomy, wanting to be more sustainable, wanting to do that, but not really knowing how to be able to do that in a way that doesn't have trade-offs, too many trade-offs for their products, for their companies, for their organizations. And so I think that's where I'm sort of seeing, and people are saying, we really want to do this, but how can we do this without compromising our bottom line? How can we do it without raising the cost for the patients? So I think that's and there are elements, as I say, sort of around education there, some around the practical, some, as I say, we've talked before about quite simple things that can be done. So starting from that simple but it's really just thinking about it at every point. We were just talking yesterday about that no lorry should ever be empty. If you're going somewhere and you're returning back, something should be in that lorry, so that transport and that and the reverse logistics. So I think that those are the kind of discussions that we should be really having together around how packaging and there are so many innovations in packaging. And what as you say, what I'd really like to see, particularly in our sector, is thinking about packaging as a really dynamic, really useful way in which we can ensure security, reduce counterfeiting, adherence, that opportunity to help patients and people to know what's in there and learn it, and around that, I think is a really exciting part of packaging. So I really think it's part of our solution, not part of our problem.
I'm going to come back. I just want to answer the question that is put up in the chat room. I want to come back to that aspect where you were saying you reflected on the trucks and the lorries not always being full. But the question is, it's an interesting idea of changing thermoforming blister aluminium polymer into a monomer polymer blister. How should we start to assess that changing from aluminium to polymer, aluminium polymer to a monopolymer, and can be much more sustainable?
Yeah.
Put that to you. I've got add-ons to that, but let's start with your side.
Yeah, so that is one of the things that we, and within the partnership, we have people who are making films, we have we've got a whole range of people of expertise there. So I think that if a redesign is possible and you can change, and it will depend on what's within there, then I think that probably at this stage there are people who are sort of starting to do those changes over there. And I think there are going to be two sort of main aspects to that. Is one, can you maintain the functionality that your other blister provided for you? Two is going to be the practical aspects of it. Is it what would it take to change? Is it going to involve retooling? Is it going to and three, what is going to be your approval process and regulation process that are going to be changing there? So I think there are going to be some sort of early movers who are going to start to think about certainly 2 and 3 there. And so it depends a little bit, I think, in one's journey about sustainability journey, about how one wants to do that. I think the final thing that one really needs to think about, and you touched on, is it actually going to make a difference? So if you've changed to a more recyclable solution, but they're not actually getting recycled, they're not getting picked up, they're not getting sorted, then have you actually moved the needle? So that's why it has to be in integration. You just doing one part of it and not being part of that circular thing around that is probably not going to take us too far. So one has to think and be engaged in that full life cycle. And that does make it harder for us, because it means that even if we do wonderful things in our own bit, if the whole system isn't moving together, it might not have the change that we need. And that's really why that was the main reason of bringing the partnership, bringing all the players, so that we can do that.
And also to add to that, to all the listeners and viewers, in October of this year, the World Packaging Organization released their packaging design guidelines for recycling. So when you are in the design stage of, let's say, a product, a pharmaceutical product, at that fundamental stage, it's a matter of referring to the guideline and making sure that you then adhere to the guidelines regarding that particular packaging format that you've decided upon. Now, having said that, and Nazneen's correct, we also need to have the correct infrastructure. So in Europe, generally across Europe, it's been done pretty well. Unfortunately, across the world, it's not. And there are a lot of areas that we really need to start focusing on. The World Packaging Organization has been implementing for the last 18 months in Indonesia a recycling plan, which we finally launched officially 10 days ago. And we are very proud of that, because Indonesia has particular recycling issues. And we now have paved the way forward. So there are two aspects: getting the front end right in relation to making sure that the most suitable materials are being used that can be recycled, and then secondly, making sure that the infrastructure is there, as Lynn reflected on, to ensure that it is being recycled. There is a third element. The third element is you and I. And this is where we, as I said in my presentation, we need to fix our own backyard and not point fingers at others. Are we doing everything we possibly can to ensure that you're giving that packaging every possible chance to be recycled? And then I said to you about the life cycle analysis, that you look at every single aspect. And as Lynn reflected on that, in the empty trucks and lorries that are being moved around the world every day, and they don't have anything in them. So they're already delivered, but they haven't picked up. Now, this is where each individual person can actually play a part in pushing back in those areas, making sure that better logistical, what's the word I'm looking for, in terms of programming that you can deliver and pick up. Because it's alarming when you see what the CO2 emissions are from our vehicles across the world. This leads me to another point, Nazanin. You mentioned in your presentation, coming back to the writer of that chat, of that question, I hope we've answered your question, but I would like to add another aspect to it, and that is you saw some examples, and Nazanin gave some examples of in blister packs where work is being done. Nazanin, you touched on the regulatory side. Now, would there be folk out there, when I say folk, I'm talking about pharmaceutical companies, that might push back on that because it means going back into shelf life trials and stability trials?
So I'm not sure that pushback is the right sort of framing of it. I think there's a recognition that you can't just swap one material for another as you might in a tertiary packing cardboard box. There you have to go through that. And that does potentially for sure have to show that stability, and there may be around through that approval process. I think one of the things that we're really sort of looking into in that sense is how much one might be able to do predictive in silico processes so that you can streamline that process. And I think in general, in regulatory processes, to be able to streamline that will be in itself more sustainable, to make it more digital and less, but also currently, if you wanted to have a more sustainable offering, if you wanted to change that, just the cost of going through that regulation process in itself is really pretty high. And so there's a lot of disincentives currently in towards making changes that might be more sustainable. So we really do have to address that. But we can also potentially make it more effective. So some of the people that we have within the partnership are really that digital and in silico prediction, the stability modeling. So and now what you can do is think about all the different formulations, all the different types of thickness, etc., and do a lot of modeling predictive before it just on your computer. And what that allows you to do is to reduce the number of things you actually have to test. That makes it much faster, much faster, but also less expensive. So it's and in the pharma in particular, we're already doing a lot of that sort of in silico kind of predictions in the formulation of medicines. So another thing that we really like to do is to think about innovations or things that work in one area and think, oh, hang on, we can apply this here. So that regulatory practice is a hurdle at the moment, and so we really have to focus on that. I think there's some other aspects current in legislation and regulation in some areas. For example, in the materials that one's allowed to use. So currently there are restrictions, or it can be hard to use these recycled monomers if you're able to recycle things back to their original monomers. To use those into your primary packaging. There's a lot of restrictions there. The food industry have been really pioneering here, and in many ways, medicines and foods are very similar. The contents are going into humans. So I think if we could allow to be able to use those recycled raw materials, that would really open up a huge opportunities for change. So some of these foundational changes and frameworks, if we can put them in place, will be really catalytic across the whole industry. But for sure, regulations and legislations are going to be an issue. I think probably the final thing to say on that is there's such a lot of differences in different parts of the world. And that, again, adds costs in resources and money of having to do slightly different things in different parts of the world. So, and for all the manufacturers and people in the systems here, people will know that, how they're doing slight tweaks, whether it's some of the information leaflets or things, and really adds lots and lots of layers of burdens and reducing that sustainability. So we might use this as an opportunity to have some harmonization there that will help in many other ways as well.
Now, you're touching on many points there. And it's such valuable information that you're sharing and to the listeners. And I know that there are quite a few from the pharmaceutical sector that I've been in touch with the last couple of days. And I'm just hoping that they're listening very carefully to what you're saying. You mentioned you are manufacturing 4.5. Excuse me asking. You had a unit of measure of TR. What does TR mean?
Sorry, trillion. 4.5 trillion.
Trillion. Wow. All right. Well, so much. Is that trillion as in numbers? Product numbers. Okay. Not in dollars.
Not in dollars. It's $1.4 trillion.
All right, 4.3 or 4.5, how many?
4.5 trillion medicines. This is estimates, obviously. 4.5 trillion
sure.
a year at a cost of about $1.4 trillion. That's about the value of that. That's the sort of value of the industry. Big industry.
No, you're throwing away 1.4.
No, that's the total amount. The sort of throwing away is, again, these are estimates, but it's in the sort of hundreds of billions.
Wow.
Of that 1.4
trillion. And when you mentioned that, you said you're working on a program, or ultimately, in trying to get those medicines to somewhere in the world that can use them. Now, that sounds good. Is it possible?
Yeah, so I think that, again, I think part of it is just conceptually thinking what is acceptable to us and what we want to make happen. So I think one of the things that the pandemic has really shown us is that we're all in it together. Healthcare is a global endeavor, and that's really the pandemic has really sort of made that clear to us. But it was always that way. But also, when we decide to do things, we can move fast and we can make things happen. And thirdly, this issue around with vaccine doses, certainly in the UK here, I was running a vaccine clinic earlier in the year, and in these sort of bottles, you have like 11 doses you can get, and we were saying we have to find an arm. We have to put every single dose into somebody's arm there. Or every dose had to be used. We didn't want to tolerate waste, and that's what the people wanted. They would have been shocked. But actually, in so many of our medicines, very expensive medicines, cancer medicines that come in certain size of doses, so you're ending up throwing away. If it's at the bottom of that, we don't use it at a huge cost, and these are desperately needed medicines. In packages, we have standard units of packaging, and if you don't need that, so that we have this currently, we accept, mainly because we don't know about it, that we are throwing away medicines in all sorts of ways. As I was saying, we want to maintain supply. We want to make sure our patients have those medicines, and therefore you do have to have within that some excess medicines available. But if you don't need them, one, can we get a better supply and demand? And that comes back to tracking your medicines, knowing where they are in the system, knowing who needs them and being able to move them. But also, if you have that excess, what can you do with that? So one of the people that we work with is a company called Serum, a not-for-profit called Serum in California. And what they have been doing over there is taking those medicines. They will collect medicines if you've got excess, and then they are doing that supply and demand to people who need it. And in the States, I mean, one often thinks that these kind of issues are divided around how rich or otherwise a country is. But we know in the States that a large percentage of people are not getting access to medicines, and sometimes they don't pick up their medicines because they can't afford to. So that cost is a real issue there. So if you can do it there, I think you can probably do it anywhere. They have gone through the process of changing some of those regulations and legislations there. So in some ways, it's a supply and demand, which is what, so everybody is, many people here are in the business of doing every day. And it's the same, I think, with these recycling, these monomers. People want monomers that have been recycled to be able to, or raw materials that have been recycled to use that. We can generate those. So there's a market there. So there's supply and demand there. People, humans, business are good at trying to do supply and demand. So that's one of the things we're trying to sort of bring together and just make that systems work.
I want to move now to a topic that I raise always when I'm talking about packaging in relation to shelf life. I'm always intrigued because certainly my mother and certainly my grandmother it would have been unheard of that milk only expires once it starts to smell in their minds. And that's how we grew up. Now, fast forward to 2021. I have children that firmly believe that the expiry date of milk is very important and that after the expiry date, you cannot drink it. Now, I've tried my level best from a packaging perspective to explain to them that there's nothing wrong with the milk, and I haven't been successful. I do not understand, and I'm sure you can explain to me in simple terms, how can milk expire 1 second after midnight on the expiry date? How does that happen? And all of a sudden, it was okay 1 second before midnight, and 1 second after midnight, it's no longer able to use that product. And I'm using milk as an example because that's a classic one in our home. I'm coming to medicines, but first answer the milk one for me.
So I think it's the definition of the term expiry date. So here, what the expiry date there in these is a sort of, it's part of that liability aspect of it. It's the date up to which whoever has made that product, milk in this instance, will guarantee that it will be safe and usable. And there obviously has to be a window there. So it's not actually saying when it's expired. There's a sort of misnomer there. It's that, and so that's why they are able to do that, because that's the time they are saying, whoever's made it, is that they will guarantee that product will be fine. If it's not fine at that point, you can come back and say, I want a refund or something. If it is fine up to that point, then as long as you've looked after it well. So it's part of really our system of being able to sort of operate in a supply chain where there are multiple players, and that this is my bit of the liability. After that, it's not my business, it's somebody else's business. And it's one of the challenges we have to have when we want to move to a more circular economy, and part of what the sort of extended product kind of regulations that are coming in are wanting to address. But it's actually quite a conceptual change for all of us. We've kind of been used to this type of way of doing it, but that, I think, is the basic answer to the question.
Now, thank you. I like that answer. I will certainly make use of it. Now let's come to that same question relating it to pharmaceutical. Let's talk a product that everyone uses somewhere in their life, paracetamol.
Yeah, so I think that there are a couple of layers that come into that. When someone has a new medicine that they've made, they obviously want to get it out to people as soon as possible. They want to do that so that people can benefit from it, but it's obviously a very competitive market, usually if there'll be more than one player there, and the first mover advantage is always good, but it's very, very good in pharmaceuticals. So you have to go through a whole set of studies to ensure your medicine is effective and safe, and that takes a certain amount of time, and there's an approval process. And usually when you're going into that first approval, you have data that will show that for maybe 18 months, 2 years, maybe 3 years. So at the time when you're saying, yes, this medicine is safe and effective and people can have it, that's the sort of typical kind of information you have. So the expiry date or the shelf life tends to be that. Again, it's not saying how long that medicine is going, usually it's not saying how long that medicine will be effective for. It's this issue about how long the supplier is able to guarantee that it will be effective for at the time that the medicine was first approved. Now, many manufacturers actually do have longer data from that. They do this ongoing information. And for say something like paracetamol or many medicines, there have been data that's shown in all sorts of ways that it's been done much longer. There was a seminal study maybe about 40 years ago in the States, where they found a warehouse full of medicines that had been sitting there for many years, and they decided to test how long were effective, and the vast majority, well over 90%, were still effective all these years.
Wow.
So particularly for solid medicines at normative, the bulk of our type of medicines, we would expect 5 years to be the norm for that. So one of the things we could change is, again, we'd have to make it easy for people. So the last thing, and I have a lot of sympathy, the last thing you want people to do, we've got our approval, we want to go back and we just want to change this. We have to make that process. So it could be something like, we would expect it to be 5 years, and we submit it 2 3 years. Can you submit the updated information to make that, unless for some reason it can't be? And that whole shelf life around could make a huge difference, because it's quite tight to get things moving. And again, we're seeing it with the vaccine here. Now vaccines, because of the temperature and things, they will have different limitations there. But still, that window to move things around, if we can have a little bit longer there, I think would have a big impact on medicines that we have to throw away, not because they're not effective anymore, or because they've been compromised, but because of a number on a box.
Nazanin, it's been absolutely a pleasure talking to you. We've been chatting for the last half an hour, believe it or not, just back and forwards, and we need to bring this to a close. Do you have a final 30-second message to the listeners in relation to, what can they be expecting to see? You said there's a 4-year time frame. What might the person, the man or woman in the street, see in the pharmaceutical sector in what we've been talking about?
Well, they may not see it, but a lot of things, different things are happening. I think across the whole of the pharmaceutical sector, how they're actually doing their own operations, renewable energy, thinking about transport. We've seen a lot of change from planes to sea travel. So being more conscious suppliers, interest in access, supporting that, I think is a trend across that. I think there are also going to perceive sort of innovations, I would hope, in terms of how they'll be able to access information about medicines more readily in different languages and videos, ways that will actually make it more patient-centered. I think we're seeing a lot of movement there, and I do think we'll see that in the next 4 years. I think there are, as you showed, innovations of packaging. So some of these they will be able to perceive, but I think what they should be asking, everybody should be asking us, is to say, we want you to be providing part of the solution. We want you to be responsible, sustainable, because we are a caring profession. We make things that are going to help people, and caring for the planet, being more sustainable, as we've seen, is one of the first ways in which we can also care for our patients. So that's what I would expect people to be perceiving. Thank you,
Nazni. It's been delightful talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on this program. We thank all the listeners and viewers across the world. Thank you for coming in. I know for some of you it's been very late, and for others it's been very, very early. We do appreciate that very much. We'd love to see you again on the 8th of December for another one of these webinars regarding another aspect of packaging. We look forward to seeing you there. But from London, Nazneen Rahman, thank you so much. And from me in Brisbane in Australia, I bid you farewell and say